The captains of the Golden Company exchanged glances. If Storm's End is still held by men loyal to Stannis, we will be taking it from him, not the Lannisters, objected Brendan Brine. Why not make common cause with him against the Lannisters? Stannis is Robert's brother, the same ilk that brought down House Targaryen, Jon Connington reminded him. Moreover, he is 1,000 leagues away with whatever meager strength he still commands. The whole realm lies between us. It would take half a year just to reach him, and he has little and less to offer. If Storm's End is so impregnable, how do you mean to take it? Asked Malo by Guile.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. We're into day 9 of the Winds of Winter event. I'm joined by JC. He's going to help me talk about Jon Connington. You know, I think a fan favorite, I would say anyway. And we're going to start with kind of a little bit of a recap, catch up where we're at in the story, where we get into Winds of Winter and all of that. Now, Jon Con, you know, out of all the different plot lines that we have going into Winds of Winter, is the one where there's a lot of mystery surrounding it, whereas like other plot lines, we at least have some groundwork. Like when we collabed about Arya, we had a whole sample chapter. Now that very subject to change. Jon Connington, we don't. The last we get of him is in A Dance with Dragons, and he's just kind of landed in the Stormlands with the Golden Company. They've taken Griffin's Roost, and he's planning to take Storm's End. We then know that Arianne, or through Arianne, that Storm's End is taken. Don't know how. It's been alluded to by Guile or something along those lines, but we're not sure how that's going to go down, as Arianne is going to be on her way to Storm's End. And so that's where we kind of get caught up. It's pretty brief because we don't have much into it. But yeah, so JC, I just want to get right into the meat of it. How do you think that Jon Connington took Storm's End? Has this kind of happened off page, I guess?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, in A Dance with Dragons, Jon Connington and young Griff, who was revealed to be Aegon Targaryen the Sixth, allegedly, they are currently being backed by the Golden Company, a group of mercenaries that has long been associated with the Blackfires. Blackfires are, the history goes way back 150 years ago, but essentially the Blackfires are offspring of Aegon the Fourth, the disgusting person who essentially had a bunch of bastard children, and some of those children were not legitimate, so they called themselves Blackfires. But anyway, the Golden Company, long associating themselves with Blackfires, they kind of hitched their wagon off of this young Griff, this Aegon the Sixth. And so now that both Griff and young Griff, Jon Connington and Aegon Targaryen, have the assistance of the Golden Company, they are essentially able to besiege a lot of places within Westeros with relative ease, because the Golden Company are renowned badasses around the entire world of Planetos. So given that they have the Golden Company, I think, despite the fact that we don't necessarily learn exactly what happened during the events of Storm's End when Jon Connington took Storm's End, I think it's safe to assume that the Golden Company, just by both their sheer strength of numbers and also just their sheer brilliance when it comes to the battlefield, was able to easily take Storm's End.
That's a good take. See, I have a different take. I think that there's going to be more to it than just a straight-on assault. Just based upon the fact that Jon Connington and when Aegon briefly discuss how they're going to even take Storm's End, there seems to be like this idea that it's going to be by guile or maybe some sort of persuasion, trickery. And I think you have to kind of put into perspective the garrison at Storm's End. They're, I would say almost loosely backing Stannis at this point. Stannis is in the north. He's nowhere near them. It's very likely he could die. We could even see, rumors like Stannis talked about where he might be alleged dead, right? All of those things could compound to this garrison, which, remember, to begin with, they also went against Stannis when Renly declared. So I think it's going to be almost a mix of like what you're talking about, the Golden Company being very formidable, a great reputation, and just sheer numbers, but also play into the fact that these men have very little morale, right? Like they Stannis is not there. There's nobody to really, be behind them. If you also want to go into an idea of like Illyrio's puppet theory, or not Illyrio's, but Varys's puppet theory, I'm not going to go into that because it's a whole rabbit hole. But
Yeah.
possibly they could have some information onto Edric Storm, somebody that again Storm's End had. It was the key to Stannis of wanting to take Storm's End, to have proof against the Lannister children that they weren't legitimate. So there's that idea, right? You have an idea where these people might just not want to risk fighting or losing their lives for a cause that's, Stannis isn't even here, right? Dragonstone also has allegedly fallen as well. So there doesn't really seem to be some big reason to just oppose the Golden Company for no reason, really. Other people have maybe brought up an idea that you could see something like Davos as well trying to sneak into Storm's End. That could be a possibility. I don't know how much the Golden Company would know about that, about getting into this, place that Davos smuggled, basically Melisandre kind of to. Who knows? But I do think that Storm's End, one way or another, it has to be taken. And so whether it's
Yeah.
by force, like you suggested, whether it's by a multitude of things, it's going to come down, more or less. And this is going to be very significant given that Storm's End is one of the most impregnable castles. Arianne talks about this in her latest chapter that we've gotten from her. And that's going to be a big sign to Westeros. Like, this is a legitimate threat. This isn't just, oh, the Golden Company are marching. They're going to get turned back again like they've done in the past. Like, this will be really the first time that we've heard of the Blackfires having a legitimate, like, big castle, or one of the main castles, I would say, of Westeros. But, let's move kind of, through, past that, and we go towards Arianne. She's on her way to Storm's End. JC, what do you think is going to kind of happen between maybe this Dornish party moving to Storm's End and people like Jon Connington and young Griff?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, right now, well, within the Winds of Winter sample chapters, Jon Con and young Griff currently have taken hold or will take hold of Storm's End, and the Dornish party, currently being led by Arianne Martell, is on their way to Storm's End. So I think they, I mean, if George R. R. Martin kind of wants to speed the story along, I think we're going to have to get to we're going to have to skip the pleasantries and be like, oh, like, hello, Arianne, it's me, young Griff slash Aegon the Sixth. Oh, hey, Aegon the Sixth, it's me, Arianne Martell. And we're just going to have to get right to an alliance. And I think both Jon Connington and Doran Martell will be keen to have this alliance because as of right now, with exception of the Golden Company, Jon Con and Aegon the Sixth really don't have anybody within Westeros that can be their potential allies. And Doran Martell, having just lost his son Quentyn Martell in Essos in A Dance with Dragons, currently has no dragon to hitch a ride on when it comes to his vendetta that he has against the Lannisters. So when he learns that, like, oh, Aegon the Sixth is over here in Westeros, let me have my daughter Arianne Martell meet up with young Griff and see if there's a potential alliance here in the making. So I think there will be a meetup, an alliance, and I think it will ultimately wind up with Arianne Martell either agreeing to marry young Griff or actually marrying young Griff, and thus we have a Dornish slash young Griff Golden Company alliance within Southern Westeros.
I agree. I think it makes perfect sense from the idea of like, what has Arianne kind of been about? When we get introduced into her, it's about her, kind of manipulating, men specifically. She's very good at
Yeah.
that. She uses, her
Yeah.
beauty, her position, those things. And you almost feel like that's like a prelude to the big one, maybe trying to sway young Griff to marry her. Because we know that Jon Connington right away is not going to want young Griff to marry Arianne, just based upon the fact that he has been very adamant throughout the entirety of the story. Even when things are brought up about young Griff marrying somebody, he's reserved for Daenerys. We need the dragons when she comes over. And so I think the dynamic would be very interesting between Jon Connington, Aegon, and Arianne, because it could have some conflict within their camp. But I do agree. The Dornish have to get into the war at some point, right? And
Right.
I don't think it's going to be a situation where, like in the show, it's okay, they wait until Daenerys comes over, because that's not even going to happen probably until, I'd say at the earliest, the end of this book. So I think they're going to get involved here. I think this could also be very interesting given that young Griff is allegedly the child of Elia, which would be interesting because, if Arianne is going to marry young Griff at some point in this book, or that's going to be at least proposed, they are related. If that is true, if young Griff is Elia's son, that's a little interesting. It's not unheard of course, especially with the Targaryens. But yeah, so you have that aspect of it, and then there's another kind of ripple to this is we don't know exactly the timing of what all of this is going to go down, because we also know that Mace Tyrell, given what we've heard in the Winds of Winter sample chapters with Arianne specifically, is that Mace Tyrell is marching on Storm's End with the power of the Reach, which is kind of weird because in A Dance with Dragons, like, he was very adamant he's going to stay in King's Landing until Marjorie is proven innocent, all that stuff. And so you have to then assume that all that's at least gone well enough to where Mace is willing to then go and reclaim Storm's End and take out this pretender or whatnot. The question that I have to you, JC, is how do you think the timing of events are going to add up? Because it's made apparent that Arianne, maybe she's going to get there before this happens. Maybe she's going to get stuck in Storm's End. Where do you think the timing of all these events is going to happen in terms of, like, this Mace Tyrell army coming to Storm's End?
Yeah, that's the timing of this is very interesting, and I'm sure it's one of the many timing issues that George is struggling with the Winds of Winter. Um, I could see it playing out both ways. One where Mace Tyrell meets Jon Connington at Storm's End prior to Arianne Martell arriving at Storm's End, and then they clash. But I think if I had to bet money on it, I think it would be that Arianne Martell arrives at Storm's End first, given that in the Winds of Winter sample chapters we already saw Arianne Martell on her way towards Storm's End as she plans to meet Griff and young Griff. So I think by the time Mace Tyrell arrives to Storm's End, Arianne will have already the Dornish will have already joined forces with the Golden Company.
I agree. I think it's another part of it is if you're going to just do the pacing of the Jon Connington storyline as well, because I don't know if George plans to give us the actual POV of them taking Storm's End, however it actually happens, or if he's going to give us one of these things where it happens, but Jon Connington, when we get his chapter, Storm's End's already been taken. It's him recounting how it all kind of went down and all that stuff. But if we do get, like, the actual, okay, this is how they did it, whether it was a battle, whether it was whatever, you have Arianne then come into that plot line. You have a little bit of, okay, let's have another break before we go into another conflict with Mace Tyrell showing up. It would just be a nice, natural breaking up of this building of tension and stuff like that. But I do think it makes the most sense for just, even for the dramatic part of the story is, okay, Arianne is trapped in Storm's End with this battle. If Mace Tyrell wins it, Arianne's not going to be in a great situation. Duran's not going to be a great situation. I think that just makes the most sense from a storytelling point of view. But that kind of moves us then to the next aspect of this kind of, I would say, early part of Winds of Winter. I think all this stuff is going to be within the first, at the very least, the first half of Winds of Winter, if not like the first third. How do you think that the battle between Mace and Jon Con will go down, or do you think there will be a battle at all? Other people have kind of speculated different theories on that.
Yeah, well, to your earlier point where you were asking whether or not you think that Jon Con taking Storm's End will be shown on page or if it'll be kind of a flashback off screen kind of thing, I think it will be off screen. I don't think they'll have a Jon Connington chapter narrating the events of him taking over Storm's End. It would kind of remove the dramatic appeal of seeing the next battle, which would be the Mace Tyrell versus Golden Company battle. It would get inundated under so many battles that this book has to cover that I think the taking of Storm's End would be just one battle too many. So, to that, I think that Mace Tyrell, once the Tyrell forces arrive at Storm's End, they will lose. I don't know if that means Mace Tyrell will bite the bullet and die here within this scenario, or if he'll just be captured and ransomed back to the Tyrells. But I very much see the combined forces of the Dornish and the Golden Company, winning this battle that I think will take place on page within probably an Arianne Martell POV chapter perspective. And then from there, the combined forces of the Dornish and the Golden Company kind of move towards King's Landing.
I agree. I think it'd be interesting, given Ariane, she could play a very similar role to like Catelyn at the Battle of the Whispering Wood.
Oh
It's
yeah,
kind of a similar situation, very different though, because Ariane would be able to most likely see the battle, whereas like Catelyn,
yeah,
we're more hearing it. We're kind of seeing glimpses. We don't know exactly what's going on. It's very climactic in terms of what's going to happen. Whereas this one, I feel like it would be almost very different. Like you'd be able to see really what's going on in this battle. Assuming she's going to be like basically on the Storm's End, battlements watching it, or in just some sort of tower or window where she can see it going on. But I do
yeah,
agree. I do agree with that, JC, that, we will actually, I think we have to see this battle. I think the Storm's End, it's not necessary. You can, sum up the things that happened there. I personally believe, just based upon, there's this certain line that we get that they might have, friends in the Reach. It's kind of a very loose line. They don't, George doesn't say much on it. It's just a kind of almost it's not a throwaway line, but it's like something that's said, but we don't get any follow up. Like there's no, okay, who are these friends? What does that even mean? I think that in this battle, Mace Tyrell has to lose. It just doesn't make sense for young Griff, the Golden Company, Jon Con to come all over and then just instantly lose. That just doesn't make any sense.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's gonna have to come down to, there's two outcomes. I think either Mace Tyrell and the Tyrells just straight up lose, or one, Mace Tyrell, and this is kind of what I used to think. I don't think this anymore, but maybe Mace just doesn't like get into this fight with them. Just does what the classic Tyrells do. They just sit out of it and let the Lannisters and the Golden Company go at it and just see who wins. I don't think that makes any sense anymore because of just how much Mace Tyrell has invested on the throne right now. Given the fact that in Kevin Lannister's chapter, the very end of Dance of Dragons, we just see how much influence Mace Tyrell is gaining and how much support. Like he's slowly taking over. It's one of those reasons why Cersei struggles with the Tyrells so much, and even Kevin feels that. So I just don't think that really makes any sense at this point. I think it has to be a battle here. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a mix of, yes, the Golden Company getting the better of the Tyrells. I think the Golden Company is a better equipped army. I think, maybe the Tyrells probably will have more men, but I think the Golden Company is a higher quality of army. But I also think there's going to be certain houses that would flip on the Tyrells. Given what we know about the first Blackfire Rebellion, a lot of it was based upon secondary houses trying to become the major house. The big one is the Peaks. We've heard, a lot about the Peaks and their support of the Blackfires, and even one of the things I want to learn so much more about, given, whether it's Fire and Blood Part 2, whether it's, whatever in the future that George does, is we get this Peak Rebellion. It's just a Peak Rebellion. It seems like it was maybe a pre-Blackfire Golden Company type thing, but I don't know. I think for me personally, I could see easily that we see, maybe the Peaks turning on the Tyrells, the Tarleys turning on the Tyrells, just based upon Brightwater Keep, which is the place of the Florence. That was given to Mace's son, and the Tarleys also believe that they have a claim to that castle. You think about, Mace Tyrell kind of claims a lot of the credit for beating Robert, but Robert's
yeah,
Rebellion, that was basically almost completely Randall Tarley. There's just a lot of, I think, tensions that can be kind of seen within the Reach, that even if one of these two houses, or any number of little houses were to flip on the Tyrells, that would be huge. And even
yeah,
if you think about just from this point, if you think about the Battle of the Blackwater, George makes a huge point of the illusion of who's winning the battle could really dictate, if that side wins or not. Because, if the Tyrells start losing this battle, that might get people to then change sides. It could get, whatever. I think a lot of this battle that I think the Golden Company will win it based upon is the start of the battle, that they are showing that they are winning, that could help them carry the battle and win, even against maybe going against odds of larger numbers than their own. What do you think about that,
yeah.
JC?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, these smaller houses within the Reach, they don't want to be on the losing side. They want to be on the winning side. So loyalty means nothing to them if it's like, oh, Mace Tyrell is losing. Well, yeah, we've been Targaryens all along. Yeah, here comes Aegon the Sixth. We love you, Aegon, even if it means us siding with the Dornish. But we don't want to be on the losing side. So,
True.
um, to your point, I could easily see just the smaller houses turning against Mace Tyrell, not showing up to this battle, be like, oh yeah, this is a losing affair. We're not going to get involved in this, and just having Mace's Tyrell army get. I don't know if they're going to get completely smoked by the Golden Company, but essentially lose to the Golden
Yeah.
Company.
At the very least, disperse their army type situation. Kind of like what we see with like Rob, for instance. Like he beats the Lannisters, but then their armies, it takes a while, but eventually the remnants of those armies form up again, and then you have a
Yeah.
problem again. Very, very similar to that. I don't think we'll be done with seeing the Tyrells in terms of battle and all the things just because of this battle. You got to remember Olenna still alive.
Oh yeah.
You still have Garland, Willis, whatever they're gonna do. So I think that lays kind of the groundwork for what is to come. Now you mentioned something which I find very interesting. So the Dornish armies, do you think they're
Mhm.
going to be a part of this battle as well?
I mean, the Dornish contingent that came with Ariane Martell for sure will be.
Yeah.
As far as a larger Dornish presence from Sunspear, I don't really know, considering it would take a long
Yes.
time to get from Sunspear to Storm's End. I'm thinking it's just the Dornish contingent that's going to be with Ariane. But if the Dornish contingent that allies with the Golden Company defeats Mace Tyrell, then I could see the rest of Dorne being like, wow, like we've got
Yeah.
momentum. Arion and young Griff have just won this battle against our sworn enemies, the Tyrells. Let's actually kind of all come together, join with this combined force, and move on towards King's Landing.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify that just for people that were listening, if maybe they were getting confused when we were mentioning like the Dornish. But I think something even more interesting. You think about how we just talked about the Tyrell armies dispersing and all that. Like, if that was to happen, where Mace loses this battle, it would allow the Dornish to maybe lead their armies to distract the Reach. Like, basically, if they're not going to King's Landing specifically to help out young Griff's cause, it's maybe tying up the Tyrell forces to where they can't come to the aid of King's Landing. That's also something that could be very important. I don't see a situation where the Golden Company, they just wait, Mace Tyrell sieging them, and then they wait for the Dornish to come to their aid. I don't think that's going to happen. That's going to take way too long, and we've got to get the
Yeah.
story moving. So that kind of gets us to the next kind of part of Jon Conn's journey, and you kind of already mentioned it a bit, but what do you think kind of their plan is in terms of the road to King's Landing, or how do you think they take King's Landing?
Well, I think they will take King's Landing. They are definitely going to move forward towards King's Landing, whether or not they wait for after defeating Mace Tyrell in this battle, whether they then immediately move on towards King's Landing and then leave kind of a residual contingent of army there behind at Storm's End to defend Storm's End. I don't know, but they definitely will move towards King's Landing, and I think they definitely will take King's Landing. It's just the Golden Company, despite the fact that maybe the Golden Company don't have the numbers they definitely don't have the numbers that the King's Landing defenses have. They have the strategizing of the Golden Company, just kind of how experienced they are in battle. I could easily see that army taking King's Landing.
Agreed. And you even think about the factions or the people that are going to be at King's Landing at this time, right? You have Duran, who sends this contingency of, Dornish, whether, with two of the Sand Snakes going to King's Landing, with Marcella, she's going to be returned to King's Landing. And so you're going to have some influence by the Dornish right away. One of the Sand Snakes taking Oberyn, or I guess Duran's council seat, I would say at this point. Um, and then you also are going to have Tyene, who's trying to kind of get buddy buddy with the High Sparrow, the Faith at this time. I think you're in a situation where the Tyrells are out of it, basically, at this time. The Lannisters, their army is still in the Riverlands. It's not really in play, but maybe they could get to King's Landing before this all goes down, or maybe they're there to at least help King's Landing. Who knows with that, because Jaime Lannister's got the entire Riverland plot going on right now. That's, I think, another issue George is probably struggling with is how do I get the timing of these things to add up? Do I want Jaime to be at King's Landing when this is happening? Does, he eventually maybe meet up with Cersei later on at Casterly Rock? A lot of different things that you can go with on this idea. And so I kind of want to ask you, because I think a lot of people have had different ideas on the actual fall of King's Landing. What do you think is going how would you compare it? Do you think it's gonna be something like how Robert's Rebellion ended, where it's Tywin sacking the city? Do you think it's gonna be an actual siege or battle, similar to like Storm's End? Or do you think it's almost gonna be like the gates are open and young Griff kind of waltzes in?
I think it'll be the gates are open and then young Griff waltzes in. The word will, I think, word will quickly spread amongst all of Westeros that there is a Targaryen here within Westerosi shores, and a lot of people still nostalgic for those Rhaegar Targaryen days of past. Rhaegar Targaryen is seen as this martyr, this beloved Rhaegar Targaryen. Anyone associated with Rhaegar Targaryen, especially his alleged son, they're going to be like, whoa, like Rhaegar's son is here on Westerosi shores. We miss Rhaegar. Cersei has, nosedived the kingdom into seven hells. We're tired of her nonsense. We're tired of the Lannisters. Let's get this trueborn Targaryen back on the Iron Throne. Let's return back to those Rhaegar days of past. So I can very easily see, a lot of just the common folk. I don't know. I guess maybe uh, just kind of piling amongst the entry gates into King's Landing and forcing the Lannister guards to open the doors for the Golden Company and for young Griff to enter into King's Landing.
Agreed. There's not much going right for Cersei. You think about her state of mind going into the next book as Kevin's dead and Varys has planted all these seeds and Pycelle's also dead. That this could have been Tyrion and the Tyrells' work or something like that. Just pointing fingers, making everybody
Yeah.
going against each other. And you think about if you're somebody living in King's Landing, Cersei has just done this Walk of Atonement thing. The High Sparrow and the religion have a huge influence right now in King's Landing. All signs point to me that the people are basically just going to allow young Griff to have this kind of heroic like moment. There's a certain art that I'll probably have up during this point that like really kind of pictures how I think young Griff is almost going to stride into King's Landing viewed as this hero figure. And it's the reason I really like the idea of young Griff and Daenerys in Dream of Spring. If we see that book, is because the very different ways I think both of those characters are going to be viewed will be something that definitely sets them apart. Whereas young Griff is going to be viewed as this hero, right? As this person bringing down the Lannisters and bringing peace back to the realm and causing order, right? And then you're gonna have Daenerys, who comes over and she has very foreign armies, whereas young Griff is bringing back, exile lords, and he's bringing back the Targaryen dynasty. Daenerys is bringing back Dothraki, Unsullied, all these different factions that aren't viewed the best by Westeros, especially. I do think that yes, you're right. I think you also got to think about Varys. Also, what is he going to do, right? What things
Oh
is he
yeah.
going to do? I've always said that Varys is kind of now in his time, right? Where Littlefinger's been like our main like player of the first couple books. I think it's now Varys. His plans took a little bit longer, but this is him setting things in motion. Whereas I also think that this is going to be like Littlefinger's downfall in the next book. Kind of, it's a nice little parallel, but that kind of leads us into I want to touch on Cersei a little bit, even though I know that Cersei's not the main focus of this book. Do you think, or how do you think she maybe escapes? Does she not escape? Do you think she does anything like insane, like in the show? What are your thoughts on Cersei as a whole at this part of the story?
Yeah, I like to believe that the explosion of the Sept of Baelor that we saw at the season 6 finale of Game of Thrones, I think that was a creation by D&D and not necessarily a George R. R. Martin plot point, just because it doesn't really make much sense within the context of the narrative. But that's a story for another time. I think Cersei will. I don't know if she'll hear advanced note, if she'll hear advanced word that, oh, this humongous army consisting of the Golden Company is making their way towards King's Landing, and then she'll flee the city, or if she'll wait until they arrive and then she'll get out of the city. I think it's going to be the first one, because if Griff and young Griff arrive to the city and Cersei is still there, I don't think they'll let Cersei escape. So I'm thinking she gets out of King's Landing, gets out of Dodge before, the whole city just kind of gets overtaken by the Golden Company. And I think she'll definitely make her way back to Casterly Rock. One, because her family, her extended family is still back at Casterly Rock. She still has, people there that she can kind of, you know, escape back to and kind of lay low for a while.
Yeah.
And two, because George R. R. Martin has stated in a previous blog post that we will see Casterly Rock at some point in the Winds of Winter. And the only character that it would make sense for us to be viewing Casterly Rock, the only POV perspective that it would make sense for us to see Casterly Rock is through Cersei's perspective.
I agree. I've been somebody that have changed my opinion on this a lot. I was somebody that I still almost like have this debate in my mind, but I just think based upon the way George has talked about the character of Cersei, I'm gonna say House of the Dragon spoiler warning here, but take that as you will. This is definitely a spoiler. It also, in a lot of ways, parallels Rhaenyra in the way that, okay, the public turns against her. She's kind of forced to leave King's Landing, all of that stuff. And I've always compared Rhaenyra and Cersei in a lot of different ways. They have a lot of different similarities. I think that does make a lot of sense given the fact that George wants us to see Casterly Rock. Maybe that could make sense with Jaime at the very end of the book, but I do think it's way more likely with something like Cersei. I do think it's almost like, okay, well, Cersei did all these bad actions. You kind of want her to pay the consequences for all the things that she's done. And so it's almost like, okay, well, we're delaying that a little bit. So there's part of me that I do think that Cersei lives. I just think that I don't know. Given the context of like what I think I would personally do in George's shoes, I would probably kill Cersei just based upon what she's done. But yeah, I'm kind of in agreement on to where we're gonna see Cersei kind of go. Maybe we see her try to set off some wildfire as like some sort of, I don't know, screw you to the public, but I don't think it's gonna be anything like blowing up the Sept of Baelor. Like that was very much in my opinion, just okay. We have a lot of characters in King's Landing. How do we get rid of them? Type
Yeah, just a
deal.
convenient way to kill off a bunch of characters for the writers.
Yeah, and let's get rid of the Faith Militant and all this stuff. Even though that's a whole different discussion. But yeah, so that kind of then prompts us into definitely the very end game, I think, of this book, which I actually want to ask you before we move on to maybe whatever we're going to see in Aegon's reign of King's Landing. When do you see King's Landing falling? Like, what point of the book do you think it switches hands from Cersei to young Griff?
So I do think it'll switch hands, not because Cersei willingly gives it
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
but because they just kind of take it because the Golden Company just kind of takes King's Landing by force. But as far as when it happens, so it depends on whether or not George can get all the plot threads that he wants to get finished in the Winds of Winter in time before the end of the Winds of Winter. I'm definitely of the opinion that George R.R. Martin will need more than 7 books to properly tie all the events of the story together. So even though it makes complete sense for George to end the Winds of Winter on King's Landing falling and young Griff taking over King's Landing, I don't know if that's when it will happen, given that George has, especially, and you can definitely see it with the Dance of Dragons, George has a penchant for growing and gardening a lot of story threads that were not initially there, and thus kind of adding more to the story that was not originally part of the story. And so a lot of the goalposts inevitably get moved back to the next book when he kind of pushes forward these other plot threads that we didn't initially know were going to be plot threads. So
Agreed.
given that, I think George R. R. Martin will still kind of stay true to his gardening tendencies of writing, and I don't know if we'll see that particular event happen by the end of the Winds of Winter, and we may have it take place at the beginning of a book 7, whether that be a Dream of Spring or whether that be like, oh, surprise, there's going to be another book between the Winds of Winter and a Dream of Spring.
George would break my heart if he did that. He would break my heart if we didn't see the fall of King's Landing at the end of the book. I'd be like,
Yeah.
no, you can't do not again. Not again. You did this with Stannis in the last book. You can't do it again. But
Yeah.
yeah. I think one thing that really made me think about that was young Griff's whole entire plot line, in my opinion, is just like, yes, it's George kind of figuring things out. Because I think, especially because I'm doing a very deep rereading of the early books, there's almost no indication whatsoever that there would ever be some sort of young Griff plotline or Jon Connington Golden Company plotline going into this book or going into the next book that we have in Winds of Winter. And so I think a lot of it is almost like, okay, George really likes to build out his world. I almost think Dance is one of the biggest offenders by this because at least in Feast for Crows, when he expands other plot lines like the Iron Islands and Dorne, they have massive repercussions on the story. Whereas Dance, it's a lot of like, okay, we're through Tyrion's eyes. We're seeing a lot of the different cities and Essos, or we're seeing the Shrouded Lord, which who knows if we're ever going to see that again. I mean, like, there's a lot of stuff like that in Dance where it's like, this is cool. We're learning more about the world, but how much relevance does this happen to the overall narrative we're telling? And so that is, I think, a very relevant point that you bring up. I personally think that it's really difficult to try to put a timeline on it, because to me, I've always thought it made the most amount of sense and would be a really nice parallel is Daenerys, whether that's she's in King's Landing, like she just, or not King's Landing, but gets to Westeros, gets to Dragonstone, her landing parallels young Griff taking the throne. And so those two things kind of happen somewhat in around the same time. But when you actually compare their two plot lines, there's just so much more that Daenerys has to do in relative to Aegon, right? If you try to map out where you think Aegon's going to go, okay, so he's going to have some stuff for counting Storm's End falling, like we've talked about. He's going to have an Arianne thing. We're going to have a Mace Tyrell stuff. Maybe we have a what do we do after that kind of chapter where it's another cool down chapter. Maybe you have a travel chapter to getting to King's Landing, and then maybe you have the fall of King's Landing. So like you're sitting here and you're going, okay, maybe, with Arianne, Jon Con, and then a mix of maybe Cersei seeing maybe the fall through her perspective, or her leaving before they get there. You're looking at a good amount of chapters in there. But if you look at Daenerys, I mean, Daenerys has way more. Like, she has way more to do. She has way.
She's further behind on her character journey.
Yes. Given where we are in the story, it almost feels like Daenerys should be much further to, like, closer to leaving Essos at this time, and she's just not. I've said that I think Daenerys will be, if not the most dominant POV of the next book, one of the top ones, like she was in Dance. Like, she just has to have a lot of stuff going on there. But yeah, so that kind of leads us to kind of our conclusion of Winds of Winter. I personally think we see the fall of King's Landing the very end of the book. JC, you're kind of on the fence. So
I hope so. Yeah. And as you're, sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say, good. as you were talking, I think now that I'm kind of spinning the wheels, the cogs in my head, it's like, okay, I think I can definitely see, I can see a book where, a Winds of Winter book where we do end with Jon Con and young Griff taking over King's Landing, considering they already have the momentum going into the Winds of Winter, where they've already landed in Westeros. They're on the verge of taking Storm's End. They probably will take Storm's End if the Arianne Martell sample chapters are to be believed. So they've got momentum going. So I can definitely see that momentum carrying them forth towards King's Landing and allowing them to take over King's Landing within a reasonable time frame so that we end the book with their takeover. But as you said, as far as Daenerys goes, she's still way further behind on her story arc. She's not even in Meereen at the moment. She's, palling around or about to pal around with Cal Jacko. So there's a lot that needs to happen with her plot thread before she even arrives into Westeros. So as you said, I think now that I think about it, it's like, all right, yeah, ending the story with a King's Landing takeover is plausible, but Daenerys arriving to Westeros, I think that's a thing for another book.
I tend to agree almost. I would love to see her get to Westeros at the end, but I just think George is going to have to cut a lot of stuff that I guarantee you he's thinking about with all these other POVs in Meereen and all these things. I almost view the young Griff plotline as being a little too far ahead. If you think about all the other plot lines, like, I almost feel like the young Griff plotline has the most, like, groundwork already built in to where whatever you would assume would happen in Winds of Winter could be, as long as we give enough time to that plotline, like, it should be there. Whereas, like, the North plotline is still a mess. Like, there's just so many different things going on. We don't know what's going to go on with Jon's plotline. That seems like it's going to take a good amount of time to get going. How does Stannis conclude? We just talked about the Essos stuff. Jaime is not even in control of the Lannister army anymore. The whole, how all those things are going to come together. It feels like this is one of the few plot lines where I almost feel like we're kind of where we need to be in terms of getting the young Griff character to, okay, this is his rise. The next book you would assume is going to be him versus Daenerys, or it's going to be however that conflict goes. But yeah.
Yeah. And, I'm not sure if we're about to talk about this, but to your point about timelines, kind of a good method to tell how much time has passed within the young Griff storyline is the grayscale that is currently plaguing Jon Connington. So Jon Connington in A Dance with Dragons, when he saves Tyrion from the Stone Men, he gets infected by this grayscale plague. However, by the end of A Dance with Dragons, the grayscale plague is only about to like his second knuckle on one of his. I forget which finger it is exactly.
I don't remember exactly, but you're on the right track. Yeah.
Right. So essentially, a few months have passed from Jon Connington saving Tyrion's life to him being at Griffin's Roost and having someone look at his grayscale and seeing that it's up to his second finger. So the grayscale it's definitely inching forward more and more along his body. It's going to crawl up along his arm, but not to the speed that it will impede him from seeing young Griff take King's Landing and at least seeing, whether there's a coronation or whether there's we see a beginning of a reign for young Griff. I don't think the grayscale will impede Jon Connington long enough to see, young Griff sit the Iron Throne that he wanted to see for Rhaegar all those years ago.
I've even thought about this idea because I think it would be a really interesting parallel if we saw, this grayscale, plague starts and Jon Con, holding this from young Griff. We see some sort of mirror to like Jorah and Daenerys, like how she has to send him away. I just think in terms of this book, we just don't have time for it. I think it's much more of a Dream of Spring, early issue than it is a Winds of Winter issue at this time. It's too much to get through. And like I talked about, I think the Jon Con plotline, as much as I love the plot line, I think it will be more in line with kind of Dance Dragons, where it's a plot line that's going on, but it's not the main focus of the book. There's many more characters that need more time that I don't think we're gonna see it. If we get a grayscale, plague going on, I think if it's gonna happen in this book, I think it's way more likely with maybe Shireen, given that we know she's going to be burned and possibilities of that. And the foreshadowing that's been done there that I think is more apparent than it's been done with Jon Con. But yeah, that's kind of where, I want to end out. We kind of got to where we kind of view this book's going to end. Thank you, JC, for joining me on this event, as always.
Of course.
On the channel. And, subscribe, head over to his channel. I have it linked in the description. It's also on screen if you want to type that into YouTube. All that, and guess what? JC will be back tomorrow's video too. So if you enjoyed, stick around. We're going to be talking about Euron, everybody's favorite villain.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
See you guys in the next one. I wanted to say this at the very end of the video. One, this video actually, as you guys can tell, did not come out before the Euron video. So tomorrow's video will actually be on Val. But I also did want to say thank you, JC, for stepping on the channel, joining, recording these really interesting. As you guys can tell, I always enjoy doing collabs, more than just talking to myself, right? Out of all of the Winds of Winter videos, most of them for this event's going to be 20 minutes or less. Both this video and the Euron video were substantially longer just because I really enjoy talking with JC. So, I really appreciate it if you would go over there, show him some love, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.